Did they go back and forth between Adam's apartment and Mr. Warner's vehicle more than one time?
Yes.
And what happened after that?
I heard a gunshot.
The cause of death is gunshot wound of head.
And are you able to give us an opinion as to the manner of death?
The manner of death is a homicide. That means that he died at the hand of another.
Were those the shorts you saw him wearing? Is that a yes? I'm sorry. It's hard, but you're going to have to answer out loud.
Yes.
And how he was begging for his life, saying, "Please don't take my life. I have a 5-year-old daughter."
And he was laughing about that.
Yes.
What were you thinking at that point?
I was crying.
In August of the year 2016, a young man named Adam Hilaire was executed in his Auburndale, Florida apartment just hours after he met a woman on the dating app Plenty of Fish. In March of 2020, the first of 4 suspects in his murder, Andre Maurice Warner, went on trial for the slaying under the threat of the death penalty if he was found guilty. 2 of Mr. Warner's co-defendants, who have yet to go to trial, testified against him as the prosecution's central witnesses and were among dozens of individuals to speak to the jury during the proceedings. The following narrative is based on statements witnesses made to authorities and to a jury during Mr. Warner's trial, and on the prosecution's version of the events that led up to and that followed the cold-blooded murder of Adam Hilaire. Adam Hilaire was 27 years old during the summer of 2016. He was working as a gas station attendant and was living in an apartment at 722 Sunset Avenue in Auburndale, Florida, which is about 45 miles southwest of Orlando and about 50 miles east of Tampa. Adam was an amateur boxer, a loyal fan of the Seminoles of Florida State University, and he was the father of a young daughter that he cherished. That summer, he broke up with his girlfriend of 2 years, with whom he'd shared the Sunset Avenue apartment. His girlfriend moved out after the breakup. He'd been apart from his ex for a month or so when he started dating again. At some point, he started an account on the dating site Plenty of Fish, and on August 18th, he connected with an 18-year-old girl named Haley Bustos. Haley Bustos had just turned 18 on the 5th of July. She had set up the Plenty of Fish account at the suggestion of a friend she had met recently, a woman named Evelyn Belmont. Evelyn had used the app to meet men, then she'd finesse the men out of money, she told Haley. Haley had lived a rather unsettled life up to this point.
Did you complete high school?
No.
What grade did you go to?
10th.
Where did you grow up at?
A little bit of everywhere.
Because Haley didn't really have nowhere to stay.
Okay. Haley did not have a place to call her own. She didn't have a regular upbringing. She didn't have parents in a home that she went to every night. As you can imagine, a girl in that position, she started hanging out with the wrong kind of people.
Haley had a friend named Joshua Ellington, who was about 26 years old at the time. They had met through Josh's brother, with whom Haley had been romantic for a time. In summer of 2016, Josh and Haley had known one another for about a year and they were very close. They'd committed crimes together. For example, one day when Josh had an issue with a young female, he asked Haley to go kick the chick's ass. Haley did just that.
And at one point in time, there was a girl who accused you of inappropriately touching her or doing some things to her?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Miss Bustos became aware of that, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you actually asked her to beat up the girl?
Yes, sir.
And Miss Bustos, on your behalf, actually beat up that girl?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, at one point in time, Josh Ellington asked you to beat up a girl for him, correct?
Yes.
And because of your relationship with Mr. Ellington, you beat up a girl for him, didn't you?
Yes.
Josh had a cousin named Lawrence Ellington and a friend named Denzel Zell Rakowski, who was released from prison in 2015. Haley met Zell through Josh and Lawrence. Sometime after, her relationship with Zell became romantic.
Let's talk about Denzel Rakowski. He was somebody that you were in a sexual relationship with.
Yes.
You more or less had somewhat of a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship.
Yes.
Zell was about 21 years old at the time. Josh, Zell, Lawrence, and Haley would hang together on the regular. On a day in early August, when Josh and Haley were hanging out with Lawrence, he took them to the home of his friend, Evelyn Belmont. She was 28 years old at the time. All accounts of this story suggest that Evelyn's apartment was the spot. It was located at 2242 Bordeaux Court in Auburndale, behind a Walmart supercenter. Evelyn's friends and acquaintances came and went from the place frequently and freely, and many of them would spend nights there. According to all accounts, people would just hang out, drink alcohol, smoke weed, and chill there. Evelyn had 2 young children who lived there with her, who were apparently no older than 4 years old or so. She had a brother named Uriah, who was commonly seen there as well. He was about 30 years old. 2 people who practically lived with Evelyn at the time were 26-year-old Andre Warner and another man named Gary Terrell Gray, also known as Gucci, who was 31 years old at the time. Evelyn, Andre, and Gary were a tight group. She would apparently refer to Gary as her cousin, though they were not blood related. Several members of the clique that had formed at Evelyn's had criminal records, which varied in volume. Andre Warner was at the time wanted in the state of Georgia on a parole violation. Zell had multiple convictions to his credit. Josh had an extensive criminal jacket, as referred to here.
Have you ever been convicted of a felony?
Yes, ma'am.
How many times?
7.
Have you ever been convicted of a crime involving false statement or dishonesty?
Yes, ma'am.
How many times?
3.
Evelyn Belmont had been arrested for burglary 4 years prior. Haley would begin spending quite a bit of time hanging out at Evelyn's apartment soon after initially meeting the woman there. Denzel and Josh and Lawrence Ellington would be there as well. Haley, like many others, would rest her head at the Belmont residence from time to time. In the days after Haley and Evelyn met, they became close. Soon things between them became sexual, despite Haley's relationship with Denzel Rakowski. At least once, Haley engaged in a threesome with Evelyn and the man with whom Evelyn was intimate at the time. Soon, Evelyn began to complain about people staying at her place while not helping her to pay bills. According to Haley's testimony, this is what eventually led to Evelyn and Haley setting up the Plenty of Fish account on Haley's phone. Only 2 weeks or so had passed between the time that Haley and Evelyn met and the day when they set up the POF account, Thursday, August 18th, and on that same day, Haley made a connection with Adam Hilaire, and they set up a date. Adam showed up at the Bordeaux Court complex at about 7 p.m. that night in his white Chrysler Sebring. Haley came outside and got in the passenger seat. Adam pulled off. They went to his apartment on Sunset Ave and had a few shots. Then Adam drove Haley to her sister-in-law's residence in the small town of Juanita so that she could change clothes. Then they went bowling at Cypress Lanes in Winter Haven, a family fun establishment Adam had been frequenting since he was a child. Winter Haven is just east of Auburndale. They bowled for an hour or two, then they got back into Adam's car. Then they stopped at Adam's apartment again. Soon after, Adam's friend, Christopher Rogers, came by.
It was like 10:30. I got off of work, somewhere around there, and went straight to his house when I got off.
When you got to his apartment, was he there with somebody?
Yes, he was there with Haley.
Was Haley somebody that you had ever seen before?
Never seen it before.
Do you know how he met Haley?
On the dating app, POL.
The three were there for a brief time. Then Christopher came along as Adam dropped Haley off where he'd picked her up earlier. Now it was after midnight. When Haley came in, Evelyn and a bunch of her friends were hanging out smoking weed. Andre and Gary were there. Josh, Lawrence, and Denzel were among them as well. At some point, she tried to talk to Zell. Zell gave Haley the cold shoulder.
What happened after that?
Haley wanted to talk to me. I kind of really didn't want to talk to her because I was talking to Haley at the time. So she was like, oh, I didn't do anything.
Were you upset that she went on the date?
Yeah.
At some point, Haley went into Evelyn's bedroom and went to sleep. A couple of hours later, Gary came into the room and woke her.
Gary.
And what did he want?
To tell me that Evelyn wanted me.
And where was Evelyn at?
On her front porch.
And was there anybody else out there with her?
Drew.
And was there some conversation at that time?
Yes. They asked me what he had and if he had anything.
Andre, Evelyn, Gary, Haley, and Josh had further discussion. They conversed about going over to Adam Hilaire's apartment.
But you said her and Evelyn were talking at some point in the kitchen?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any idea what they were talking about?
Not at first, until they came in the living room and discussed it.
Okay, so they came out in the living room, and then at that point, Andre and Gary joined the conversation?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
There was just a general discussion that they were going to rob this person?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and was Andre Warner involved in that discussion?
At some point, yes, ma'am.
Was Gary Gray involved in that discussion?
Yes, ma'am.
Was Haley involved in that discussion?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you involved in that discussion?
Yes, ma'am.
So it was the four of you that were indicating that you were going to participate?
Yes, ma'am.
Josh Ellington was designated the wheelman. He got into the driver's seat of Andre's Kia. Andre brought a pistol. Gary and Haley got in the car as well, and Haley led the way to where Adam lived. When they arrived, Gary and Andre got out of the car. Haley and Josh stayed behind. Gary and Andre went around to Adam's back door, which he used as a main entry-exit way since it was closer to the parking lot than was his front door. Haley testified that minutes later, Andre came out and told Josh to pull the car up outside the front door. Gary and Andre proceeded to dash out of the house with flat-screen televisions, a collection of baseball caps, a few bottles of liquor, some jewelry, a video game console, and a few other items. They made 2 or 3 trips back and forth. Shortly after they went in for the last time, Haley said the sound of a gunshot resounded from inside the dwelling.
Okay. And what happened after that?
I heard a gunshot.
Then Gary and Andre returned to the car and Josh, still behind the wheel, pulled away. As the 4 bandits made their way back to Evelyn's, Haley said she began to cry when Gary and Andre joked and laughed about how Adam had begged for his life just a few minutes before.
And how he was begging for his life, saying, please don't take my life. I have a 5-year-old daughter.
And he was laughing about that?
Yes.
What were you thinking at that point?
I was crying.
But she said that Andre would put her somewhat at ease by telling her later that Adam had only been shot in the arm. Back at Evelyn's, they took inventory of the plunder. As was typical, there were several hangers-on hanging out at Evelyn's that morning. There was celebration. The group drank heavily on the liquor they had just stolen from Adam Hilaire. Gary and Andre were apparently especially proud of the successful job.
They was kind of like boasting about it, like it was a successful mission.
Was there anybody in particular that was boasting?
Gary and Andre.
What was Andre Warner's demeanor during this time?
He was happy.
What about Gary Gray?
The same.
Did you see liquor bottles at Evelyn's at this point?
Yes.
Tell us about that. What were they doing with those?
They were drinking.
And do you remember anything that they were saying?
They was kind of like bragging about tying him up and that he was like begging for his life.
Did you see them drinking liquor?
Yes.
Did you see anybody with a firearm that night after they returned?
I didn't see a gun, but it was being talked about.
And who was talking about it?
Andre.
Yeah.
And Haley told me she heard a gunshot.
Okay. What was Andre saying?
Andre was like bragging like he always keep his fire on him. He said something like along the lines of, I always keep mine on me. And that's like saying, I always keep my weapon on me.
So fire, that means weapon.
Yeah.
That means firearm.
Yeah.
They drank together until sunup.
Till the sun come up.
Eventually, they'd all fall asleep.
Everybody went to sleep.
I thought I was locked out. I walked around the game one day and my buddy's there and his daddy's dead. I walked in, so I got home from work and I didn't bring my keys. So I'm knocking on the back door that we usually use, and nobody answers. I sat there for like an hour because his car was here, thinking he might have rode with his brother or something. So I get on the bicycle to go to the store, and I notice the front door's open. And I walk in, and the TV's gone, the Xbox is gone, and he's right in the kitchen. And I'm pretty sure he's dead. There's blood everywhere. No, he's face down in a pool of his own blood. I don't know if he's shot or stabbed or what. He's bleeding out of his ear. He's he's dead. I'm sorry, he's dead. Sorry,
okay.
Craziest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Tell me, please, why do you think that he's dead?
He's dead as a doornail, what the guy just walked out said. A neighbor. Oh my God.
John Hunn was incarcerated at the time of his testimony on an unrelated case.
Tell us how long you and Adam were there together.
Maybe a half hour. We hung out. I got in the shower. He left to go pick somebody up.
Did you know where he was going?
He told me he was going to pick up a girl he met on Plenty of Fish.
Did he return back to the apartment?
Yes, ma'am.
Did he have that girl?
Yes.
How long were Adam and the girl there at the apartment while you were there?
Less than an hour.
Did they leave or did you leave?
They left.
Did you know where they were going?
Either bowling or a movie, some kind of date.
Did you communicate with Adam after that?
Via text one time. I don't remember exactly the time, but I would say it was after midnight. And he texted me, and from what I remember, it was just kind of, where'd you go? Because I guess I never told him I was going to take off, but it was just kind of like, where'd you go type of thing. I told him I was at my girl's house and that I'd be back the next day to leave the key out.
The next day, John again came by after work and went to the back door, which was locked.
Okay. But you were at the back door,
yes,
and
ma'am.
It was locked?
Yes.
And it looks like you tried texting Adam. Did you try calling him?
I'm sure I did.
Did you ever get a response?
No.
And at 5:54 p.m., there's another text message from you that says, I'm stuck outside, been here since like 4. Do you remember sending that?
Pretty much, yeah.
Did you ever get a response to that text message?
No, ma'am.
How long do you think you waited outside the apartment?
Probably 2 hours.
And what did you do after that?
I got thirsty, decided I was going to get on the bicycle and go to the store, and hopefully he'd be back by then. And I rounded the corner and noticed that the front door was open, and cautiously went up to it because it was weird that it was open, like it's never been open. So cautiously, poked my head in and seen that stuff had been ransacked and things were missing. I wanted to make some noise to make sure that, that no one was still in there. So I just loudly said, damn, they robbed us. Didn't hear anything, so I walk in. And, you know how the setup of the apartment is, but I rounded the first corner beside the bar right there, kind of just not paying attention to anything. Looked in there, everything was ransacked, and I turned around, and that's when I seen Boopy laying there on the floor. Oh, man.
What did you do when you saw Adam?
Well, at first, I just thought they beat him up real bad. I started walking towards him and realized that's not what happened, that I could see, everything was going on. So I don't know, I was just in shock. So I walked in the apartment again and looked at him again. And then I called 911.
Did you talk to law enforcement that night?
Yes.
Were they asking you questions about who Adam was last with when you saw him?
Yes.
Did you tell them about the young Spanish girl that you saw?
Yes, ma'am.
Before John finally came around to the front door and found it wide open, Adam's neighbor from across the road had noticed it. She had noticed the door ajar several times that day. It was her day off, and during the course of bringing her dogs outside multiple times and going about her errands, she'd seen that door standing open all day long. When police arrived, they found John Hunn outside Adam's apartment, beside himself, so to speak. Onlookers had gathered around. Inside, they found Adam Hilaire dead on his kitchen floor of a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. The bullet had torn through the upper right rear side of Adam's head, cut a clear path through his brain, and broke through his left cheek upon exit. The downward trajectory of the bullet would later inform investigators' belief that Adam had been on his knees when he was shot. Police developed the theory that his assailants had gone to the back door of the place and knocked. Then the men entered by force. After Adam had opened the door, either the threat of Andre's pistol or his 6'5", 240-pound frame would have been enough to move Adam Hilaire aside. Police talked with John and also made contact with Christopher Rogers.
And you told him about Haley, but did you know her name at the time, or did you remember her name?
No, I didn't know her name. Really.
How did you describe her?
She was Spanish, short, curly hair, and her clothes. She had on a blue jacket with blue pants and white flip-flops.
Did you tell law enforcement where you guys had dropped her off at?
Yes.
John and Christopher informed investigating officers that Adam had been on a date with a woman just prior to his murder, but didn't know much about her, not even her name. They referred to her simply as the Spanish girl. Christopher showed police where he and Adam had dropped her off earlier that morning, but investigators had few other clues to pursue just then. On Friday, August 19th, hours after the robbery, Josh Ellington left Evelyn Belmont's apartment with his cousin Lawrence and Denzel, while Haley remained, along with Andre, Gary, and others. That day, Haley went with Evelyn and Gary to Lakeland to try to sell the stolen television sets. One was unsellable as it was damaged, so the group discarded it at the side of a road. Sometime that day, Haley got confirmation of what had happened to Adam.
You were looking at the news?
No, the new posts and stuff like that, to see if it popped up.
To see if what popped up?
Anything about what happened. I just wanted to know, what happened.
You wanted to know what happened?
Yeah.
Well, you told us that you found out that Adam had been killed. Is that how you found out, by that Facebook post?
Yes.
Haley spoke with Andre, and he admitted to her what had happened inside Adam's apartment.
What did Andre Warner tell you about that?
That he put him on his knees in the kitchen.
What else did he say?
That he shot him.
Did he tell you why he shot him?
Because he went blind face.
What does that mean?
With no mask.
No mask. So, Andre told you that he put Adam on his knees.
Yes.
And shot him.
Yes.
Because he went in blind-faced?
Yes.
Andre Warner, this defendant, tells her that I shot Adam, and the reason why is because I was barefaced. That's Andre Warner's words. Because he chose to go into Adam Hilaire's apartment without a cover on his face.
That night, Haley, Andre, Gary, and Evelyn went to a strip club in Tampa with a group of other individuals.
What else did you guys do that night?
We went to the strip club.
They continued trying to fence the stolen goods on the following day, Saturday, August 20th. On that day, Haley and Gary borrowed Andre's car and drove to Gary's sister's Winter Haven residence. Gary sold his sister the Xbox video game console. He also sold her the pieces of jewelry Adam had gotten for his young daughter.
And did you guys actually sell the Xbox to Gary's sister?
Yes.
Did you sell anything else?
Jewelry.
Jewelry?
Yes.
Can you describe the jewelry to us?
It was for a child. I want to say it said Daddy's little girl. I'm not sure.
You think it said Daddy's little girl?
Yes.
Gary's sister was apparently unaware that the items had been stolen. Gary split the proceeds from the sale with Haley. Haley received about $50. On the following day, Sunday, August 21st, Haley again borrowed Andre's car. She drove over to her sister-in-law's in Juanita. She caught sight of detectives exiting a vehicle and she fled. She turned the car around and rushed back to Evelyn's. Haley assumed that these cops were there looking into Adam's murder. They were in fact from the Winter Haven Police Department and had come to the Juanita home seeking information about Haley's potential involvement in a separate crime, which she was suspected of conspiring to commit.
That's why Winter Haven PD tried to come in contact with Haley Bustos, was because of this burglary.
And when she sees the Winter Haven detectives get out of the vehicle, she flees.
The officers proceeded to speak with some of Haley's family members there at her sister-in-law's residence. These conversations led to an interesting tip.
They talk to her young cousins that are there. And one of the cousins makes the statement that she probably fled because she was in the dead boy's car. The young cousins, thinking that that was Adam's car because they had seen Adam in a white vehicle, a couple days prior, they thought it was the same vehicle. So obviously that statement piques the interest of the Winter Haven Police Department detectives. They know that Auburndale has an active homicide investigation going on. So they reach out to the Auburndale Police Department and advise them of the information that they had obtained. A couple of the Auburndale detectives respond out to Juanita and talk to the cousins and confirm that this is the young Hispanic female that they were wanting to talk to.
Auburndale police went back to the Bordeaux court complex, now looking for Andre Warner's white Kia. That day, police took Haley Bustos, Andre Warner, Gary Gray, and Josh Ellington into custody. When Haley was questioned, she gave detectives half-truths and deception. She and her co-conspirators denied being involved in any crime. But soon Haley's disposition changed, and when she spoke with investigators again a few days later, she told what she knew about the slaying of Adam Hilaire. The four outlaws were charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit robbery, and other offenses. Haley Bustos and Josh Ellington would both later agree to testify against Andre Warner. They had not received promises from the state in exchange for their testimony. In March of 2020, when Andre went to trial, they provided the preceding testimony, which was central to the prosecution's case. When he questioned Haley Bustos and Josh Ellington, Andre Warner's defense attorney, Robert Norgard, attacked both their credibility. He said the two were only testifying against Warner because they were hoping to get better deals from the state in their own cases. He got them to admit as much during his cross-examinations. He had Haley acknowledge the fact that she was smoking weed constantly and doing Molly every day at the time in question, and questioned her recollection of certain details of the relevant events. Under Mr. Norgard's cross-examination, Josh conceded that of the numerous crimes of which he'd been convicted, 3 of them involved lying to authorities. Norgard also questioned the credibility of Denzel Rakowski, who was testifying for the state while incarcerated and was facing charges for allegedly having violated his probation. Norgard said that Zell was only testifying because he was hoping to get a break in his case, though his testimony was not included in any agreement between him and the prosecutor's office.
You're hoping that your being here today is going to help you get that 15 years off your back, right?
No, sir.
Just hear out of the goodness of your heart.
The defense called to the stand a man named Daniel Crawford, who had been a cellmate of Josh Ellington at some point following his arrest, and claimed that Ellington had admitted to him that he was the triggerman in Hilaire's murder.
When you were a roommate of Mr. Ellington's, did you have, on occasion, did you speak with Mr. Ellington about a homicide charge that he was in jail for?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did Mr. Ellington say anything to you about his involvement in the homicide?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What did he tell you about his involvement in the homicide?
That he did
shoot the guy.
Okay.
The defense emphasized the point that there was no physical evidence connecting Mr. Warner to the murder of Adam Hilaire. For example, during his questioning of Detective Christy Allaire, the lead investigator in the Adam Hilaire murder, he had her confirm the fact that a gunshot residue test had not been performed on Mr. Warner.
Just so we're 100% clear, there was no gunshot residue test done on Mr. Warner.
Correct.
Still, some of the most damning evidence against Mr. Warner involved, albeit in an indirect way, that GSR test, which was never performed. After Andre's arrest, he spoke with his grandfather from jail. His grandfather questioned Andre about evidence that may have been provided to a grand jury.
Did they ever take a residue test on you? A who? The residue test, gunshot residue? No. But that's why I want to know. They took a residue test.
You know? No, they didn't take no residue test, and it took them a couple of days before they came and got me. I took plenty of showers. I take a shower every day. And the residue only stays on you.
I know all about that, okay? I know all about that. Okay, I know about that. So you know what you're trying to tell me about. And I know about residue, how long it lasts, and what conditions and everything else. I just want to make sure, you know.
Yeah, they never did that. The only thing they did on me was a DNA test.
Andre testified on his own behalf and was questioned about the phone call with his grandfather.
Now, finally, let's talk about that phone call. You didn't tell your grandfather during that phone call. You didn't do it?
No, I did not.
No. What's the first thing you say? You say, I took plenty of showers between the murder and my arrest.
I didn't say murder, per se. No, I did not.
But you said you took plenty of showers between then and now.
I told him it took me a couple of days to come get me from the time of what they say happened. And I took plenty of showers. I took a shower every day. And gunpowder residue stays on you for 24 hours. That's what I said.
So you knew that gunshot residue wouldn't be on your hands anyway because you took showers and because you knew that it would only last for 24 hours.
I was telling my grandfather facts. So what he can tell that this is how he can know that they're lying. This is how you know I done took plenty of showers. That's why I said what I said.
So the law enforcement officers wouldn't have been able to get any GSR from you because of the showers that you took and because of the amount of time that had passed. Isn't that right? And you knew that.
From my understanding, yes.
It's highly unusual for criminal defendants to testify in their own defense. The fact that Andre did so suggests he knew the trial wasn't going well for him and that he needed to do something drastic. But it would appear that his testimony did little to change the tide, as you can see from the previously shown clip. He seemed similarly incredible during much of the rest of his testimony. He claimed that he had nothing to do with the crimes that occurred at Adam Hilaire's apartment. He said he'd gone to sleep and woke sometime later, and when Haley, Josh, and Gary returned, they had bottles of liquor and other items that turned out to have been stolen from Adam Hilaire. But according to him, he wasn't stressing it so much, despite the fact that he was a convicted felon who at the time was wanted in another state.
Well, I started overhearing phone calls while we're in the car, talking about a lick this or a lick that. And I knew they took my car, but I didn't know that if they did anything stupid or anything like that. But over the phone call that I overheard, I started piecing things together. So that's what made me realize maybe something went on. But I didn't really look into it because at the time that's just something I didn't look into really. As long as no pressure came to me about it, I wasn't really stressing it too much.
Andre Warner doesn't look or sound like an innocent man. His demeanor isn't that of someone falsely accused and on the verge of being convicted of a crime with which he had nothing to do, but of a man who's caught, who knows he's caught, and is going through the motions, half-heartedly telling the lies he's concocted in order to possibly save himself from his fate.
Now you've been sitting through this whole entire trial, right?
Yes, ma'am.
You heard what Haley testified to, right?
Yes, ma'am.
You heard what Josh testified to?
Yes, ma'am.
You heard what Denzel testified to?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And according to you, these are people that you got along with.
Yes, I did.
no reason for them to tell anybody that you're the one responsible for Adam's murder, right?
That's what I thought.
You would agree, no reason for them to do that.
Not from my recollection, no.
On Wednesday, March 18th of 2020, after deliberating for 2.5 hours, a jury found Andre Maurice Warner guilty of murder, armed robbery, and other charges. The penalty phase of the trial, in which the jury was to decide if Warner would face life or death, was subsequently postponed in April due to COVID-19 restrictions. A few months after his conviction, in July, Warner was formally accused of punching a detention officer in the face after the officer had ordered Warner to go back to his cell following recreation time, and Warner refused. This was only one of several additional charges Warner has collected since his 2016 arrest. Jail guards found a makeshift knife sewn into Warner's boxer shorts in September of 2018, and he was charged with having a weapon in a detention facility. In 2019, he was charged with punching another inmate as they walked through the tunnel from the courthouse to a vehicle to be taken back to jail. Andre has pleaded not guilty to all 3 of those charges and is awaiting trial on all of them. On Tuesday, June 29, 2021, a jury recommended that Andre Warner be put to death. The final decision as to Mr. Warner's fate is in the hands of presiding judge Jalal Harb. He will announce his decision at a hearing that is yet to be scheduled. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thanks for liking, subscribing, commenting. Thanks for helping this channel to grow. I appreciate you guys to the fullest. Until next time, peace.